Can you break down the 4-act structure, starting with routine?
Yeah. So, so the 4-act structure, the tradition is the 3-act structure, which largely, goes back to Socrates, the beginning, the middle, and the end, and the unity of action and all that stuff. Ultimately, I don't think there's, you can have 7 acts, you can have 2 acts, you can have a 1 act, But I spent quite a bit of time trying to figure out what exactly is it that makes an act? Composes an act? And what I came to was an act is defined, ultimately, there is a unity, but it's a unity of strategy. So the first act is when we're first introduced to the character and we're learning what their values are. The whole point of the first act is to engage in the character, see what they care about, why they care about certain things. And the way we learn what they care about is by how they solve problems. Whether they're telling you, I really care about this, I really care about this baby. Meanwhile, the baby's like climbing off into the middle of the highway. You know what they actually believe by their contradictions. But the first act ultimately is learning what their values are, and then they're presented with a problem. And that problem is either an opportunity or a threat, right? So they can be good. You won the lottery. Winning the lottery is a problem because you've got all of these other things that you need to do to protect yourself. And then also, the UFO, the mothership arrives. That's a problem. You're like, are we at war? Are they going to attack us? Is this dangerous? Or is this a new revelation to a new life? I don't know. But in that first act, that becomes the problem they're going to solve. So whatever routine they have, we learn what their basic way of solving problems is. So when they're presented with the problem, all of a sudden we're like, oh, they have to go into a new world. They have to enter a new moral sphere. The presentation of the problem is a new moral sphere. A mothership arriving suddenly changes our relationship to the universe dramatically. So the first act, you hit that threshold of here's the problem, are you going to solve it or not? The second they take 2 steps to go solve the problem, they've crossed into that threshold. And so the next strategy becomes, okay, well, I don't know anything about aliens, but I know that before the way I solved problems was by shooting at anything that came near me. And so the first part of the second act, the second act becomes, well, this is how I know how to solve problems. If I see something crawling towards me, I'm going to shoot at it, right? Which ends up making things worse until you hit the midpoint where they realize, oh, this is great. I can shoot any alien that comes near me. Until you hit the midpoint and you're like, oh, they actually were trying to help me. They're actually helping me trying to stop some other thing that was actually sabotaging us. They were actually an intervention. That's interesting. So the midpoint, all of a sudden, becomes reactionary. So at first it's proactive, and then you hit the midpoint, then it's reactionary, which means everything they're doing, the idea is that, shooting everything that comes near you is not a good solution. It's not a good strategy to solve every problem. And when the aliens come, you're presented with new problems. So all the consequences of being proactive in Act 2, in Act 3, starts to completely unravel. It dismantles your values until you're brought down to the low point. And that's when you hit the bottom of Act 3, transitioning to Act 4, which is usually where the epiphany happens in a character arc. And then that's when you're like, oh, these people are actually trying to help me, or these creatures were trying to help me. That's when you engage them. I'm using this as just like, random brainstorming. But as a random idea, this is what solves, like, okay, now I know that these people are actually, or these aliens are allies, wherever the story goes. But the point of it is I broke it down into 4 acts rather than 3 acts because there's always usually that midpoint. Now this is usually with like a 90-minute or 2-hour film. That's just kind of the convention. Now, you can, like, the perfect example is Apocalypse Now. It has basically 2 scenes for the very first act, and then I think it's like 8 scenes, 8 or 9 scenes for the second act, and then the third act, another 7. So it's like there are all different plot points. The structure doesn't matter as far as like, timing. What matters is understanding how these values or how these conflicts expose the strategy. And as they go through and have these different strategies, it forces them to adapt to new world and new information.
And why did you choose that film?
Mainly because I'm doing a deep dive into it. I'm doing a 7-hour deep dive into Apocalypse Now.
That's excellent. The first one I've watched.
Oh, you were able to catch some of it? Cool.
Yeah, you have the first like 50 minutes or something?
Yeah, the first 50 minutes of the first episode's out now. And it's coming out every Tuesday at 10 a.m. I'm going to be releasing another hour. And I'm doing a deep dive into it, which means I have a whole hour. Each hour is dedicated to approximately 3 or 4 plot points. And in the end, it's a 7-hour deep dive into what is essentially a 2.5-hour movie. Now I'm doing Apocalypse Now Redux, which dives into the stuff that wasn't in the original film that he released in 2001. Coppola released in 2001. But I think that movie is the perfect example of a ritual, story as a ritual, in that it uses story as a way to engage sacred values, and it takes a character who goes through an intense conflict that drives him inside out, causes him to drop all of his masks until he's forced to face ultimate brutality, which is Colonel Kurtz. And it's the perfect example of ritual. Now, I do want to say this, it's a bit of a, I don't mean it to come off as a critique, but it's part of what I think is something that's kind of, a lot of writers are using it a bit as a crutch, which is the hero's journey. Specifically Joseph Campbell's approach to it. I love Joseph Campbell. I learned a lot from him. He really inspired a lot of my work. And he helped me to engage mythology from a really interesting perspective, and it helped me grow and mature a lot. The only thing is this idea of the monomyth. What I noticed, I did a video a few years back called Beyond the Hero's Journey. And in that, I posed this idea of, the moral mosaic, which is a way of saying, okay, the hero's journey is essentially stories about heroes. And a lot of people, because of Star Wars and success of Star Wars, they start to think of like, okay, well, every story needs a hero. But a hero is a specific kind of protagonist. And what I realized that I don't think I made very clear in the Beyond the Hero's Journey story, or the moral mosaic, was that what I was trying to convey was that I believe what Joseph Campbell was doing was articulating, he was taking von Gennep's rite of passage and articulating very specific metaphors that represent different elements of the rites of passage. Ultimately, his writer or his hero's journey, or the monomyth, is a form of indoctrination. It's a form of ritual. And so my approach, the story ritual, was a way to say, okay, I'm going to boil all these elements down to their most essential critical variables and start to say, all right, this is how we use story to communicate values. But I don't think that's actually the highest level of story. I think as story artists, I mentioned that we mature beyond different things. I think that the highest level of stories are, moral mosaics, are stories that transcend just the ritual, just the imposition or the vectors of values through story, but something much more meaningful, which is insight into humanity. It basically takes, the rituals tend to deal with heroes and villains, and you use that to convey values. Whereas the moral mosaic goes beyond that and says, maybe everybody has rational reasons for the way they behave. Maybe it's too simple and too cheap and too easy to regard someone as evil. Maybe we use the word evil as a pretext or as an excuse to dismiss them and feel valid in the virtues we have. But I realized in order to engage that, first I needed to really articulate what exactly is a ritual. What is the relationship between ritual and story? And so that's what the story ritual is. It's an attempt to say, this is how we use stories to communicate values. And then at the very end of the book, I had this chapter called The Propaganda Trap. The propaganda trap is basically when, as storytellers, we fall into this trap, which is, I'm going to change your mind. And I think that's the trap that a lot of artists and a lot of writers are falling into. A lot of producers are falling into it. This is how we get people to agree with me politically. It's a terrible way of approaching story. And most of them aren't even doing it well. If they're doing it well, like Apocalypse Now, I think is a good example of doing it well, like really conveying the moral values that it wants to convey. It's persuasive and meaningful and still allows for some insight. But I still think a moral mosaic is going beyond the ritual and saying maybe we need greater insight into humanity. Maybe it's not as simple as these people are evil, these people are good, therefore these people should be, cast off, ostracized, or murdered,
And will you be doing the same with The Heart of Darkness?
So The Heart of Darkness, great question. I end up, the conclusion, so I end up doing, the 6 episodes are dedicated to just Apocalypse Now and how it connects to The Heart of Darkness. But the final episode where is kind of a conclusion where I kind of draw all of it together and say, what is this really about? And in order to do that, we have to dive into the novel Heart of Darkness. And that's when I spend some time really diving into what exactly was Conrad's book really about. He was using a very complex level of, it was one of the first modern novels where he was portraying people who he clearly felt were very misguided and wrong, but he had to do it in a way that honored their values. So when you read it, you're like, is this racist? Is this awful? Are these horrible people? And then you're like, oh, they're slowly going through epiphanies. They're realizing this is about a transformation of values, about the imperialism that England was going through at the time. So yeah, I end up doing a deep dive into Heart of Darkness as foundational to Apocalypse Now.
Right, and I'm sorry, I guess I should have said sort of like using Francis Ford Coppola's journey and plugging in the mosaic and the hero's journey into what he and his wife went through to make the film. And looking at that as a character study and all the struggles and all the sort of the opposition they were against.
It's interesting. I feel like in a way I try to engage it where I'm definitely very interested in Coppola's intention. In fact, in the series, I try very hard to dive into first Milius. Milius was the first one to write the script in '69. Him and then Lucas came in and they developed it more. And then Coppola didn't come in until I think it was 75, 74. I think he'd read it in 73, and then 75, 74 is when he officially got on the project, became the director because Lucas didn't want to do it. And through that process, I believe Coppola tapped into something in the Heart of Darkness as well as something in the cultural zeitgeist that I don't think Milius was aware of. And I think Coppola took what Milius brought and found new insight. And I think it was directly connected, and I talk about this in the series, but I think it was directly connected to the Pentagon Papers and the disclosures of Daniel Ellsberg and Anthony Rousseau. Their experience in trying to expose what was going on in Vietnam had them go through a journey through the Heart of Darkness. And I believe that Apocalypse Now is an allegory for the Ellsberg trials. And I think Coppola was tapping into it in a really interesting way. And it's in a way that I think he wanted people to discover because he's constantly planting all these seeds. So I believe in my series, I'm plucking all the threads and tying it all together. And it directly, and the way he did it, the thing he never admitted to was that it was about Ellsberg. But what he did do was start to say, hey, this is all about imperialism. This is all about the Heart of Darkness. This all connects to Conrad's deeply conflicted soul for when he was on the Congo. And he was seeing the way that the imperialists, the Ivory traders were treating the natives with such contempt. And then he also, the way he had this intense epiphany about the humanity of the people that they were exploiting. And I think Apocalypse Now, he tapped into something really interesting with that, much more so than some sort of, war action movie. But Milius was the thing that opened up that door for him. You know, that's why I compare them to the butcher and the chef, you know.
Right,
Milius is kind of a butcher, and then Coppola is the chef who prepares the food that was butchered and presents it in this way that's like, oh, so many great ideas. So.
And he was a chef on his films too.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a good analogy.
Yeah, exactly. Plus, I also think it's one of the reasons I wanted to choose this movie. It's the perfect example of story as a ritual, but also I think it's about our industry now. Like, they were new Hollywood. Coppola, Spielberg, Lucas. You know, the first blockbuster ever was Jaws. First movie to make $100 million in the theaters. And it changed the way the industry worked. And keep in mind, 1969, Hollywood was collapsing. Most of the studios were owned by studio heads that were aging out. These were tycoons that had gone through all of their battles and were kind of like, celebrity was waning. And they were starting to, you know, that's when, like, you know, Dustin Hoffman and Al Pacino, a lot of these like new Hollywood people who didn't fit the Hollywood type, they're almost casting against type, but were brilliant actors. And I think that's really important for us to see right now, is to say, like, we need a new Hollywood. Maybe it's not Hollywood, but we need a new story machine that's much more compelling, and it's getting back to these things that they were connected to with New Hollywood, which is a deep sense of irony, a deep sense of character. It's disagreeable, it's challenging, it's punk rock, but it's also provocative in a way that's like, it's both countercultural as well as countercultural. You know, it's not. I think the Hollywood that we need to be developing is one where artists is about, they understand that ultimately story, this gets back into the concept of AI. Story, it's one of the things that I think so many studios are getting wrong. And unfortunately, they're going down this route. A lot of them, you know, most of the studios are in, this is a war right now. Each studio, they have executives who are at war with each other, trying to figure out what is their relationship with AI. And in truth, AI is just another medium. It's not film, and it's not story. It just isn't. It tries to engage story, but the reality is that we evolved as human beings, as Homo sapiens, telling stories to each other. And it's the fact that we tell stories, that we use stories to connect with each other, is why this idea of some medium coming in and saying, I'm going to intervene and give it everything you want. I'm going to just present to you. I'm just going to give you the images you want. I'm going to give you the stories you want to hear. We innately have it deep in our DNA to say, I don't trust it. And that's how you know that ultimately, I think there's functional things to AI. You know, working in Unreal Engine and working with a lot of these things, there are a lot of elements. Well, it's what they call AI. I don't think it actually is intelligence, but it is, you know, it's pretty much just calculators. Like it's predictive text calculators. It's aggregated algorithms. That would be a better word for it than artificial intelligence. It's not problem solving. It is a way of predicting what somebody wants. If somebody says, hey, go get me a burger, well, we've got 65% says this is what a burger is, which is better than 40, so we'll just go with this burger presentation. But ultimately, it's not the way we produce stories. We produce stories by wanting to connect with other human beings. And that's what's ultimately why, unfortunately, it seems like a lot of the studios are going to have to learn the lesson that this isn't what we're seeking when we engage story. Like, we might be able, like, most of what we're seeing AI is spectacle. And it's fine. I think if people are interested in AI, they should keep exploring it. I went through my own kind of journey with it and ultimately found it to be not very useful in the practical sense. And most people are finding it to be not very useful, which is why I think the bubble is starting to collapse. Well, it's not collapsing, but it is. There's lots of threat to the boundaries of it. But I think ultimately, when we're talking about story, we are using story to connect as bridges to other humans. Now AI is saying, "Oh, that's okay. We'll just build a bridge for you." When I write a novel, when I'm working on a book, every word, every paragraph as flawed as it might be, is my attempt to connect with it. And I feel that joy. That's why I don't understand writers and artists that are like, oh, I hate writing, but I just want to have a good story. But it's when you really engage art and you love it, it is like making love. Like it is like that beautiful connection that you feel, where it's the idea of something else coming along and saying, hey, this is how you can say the word better. It's like, sure, you just don't get it. It's an uninvited guest. It's an intervention that isn't really welcome. So I'm curious to see how things pan out, but I think ultimately what's going to happen in the next few years is I think there's going to be an explosion of people wanting to tell deeply human stories on a level that AI can't approach. It's just not capable of it.
Or similar to someone that loves cooking, but then, oh, hey, I have this meal delivery service, which is great if you're working 9 to 5 and that's perfect thing. But if you really love crafting a meal and experimenting, just doing, punching in a code and having it ready for you is not the same thing.
Yeah, I've experimented with AI, and honestly, it might be decent at generating some reference, but ultimately even the reference is very flawed. But yeah, ultimately it's good at doing the work that nobody wants to do, including read it. I'm baffled by people that are publishing AI novels, because I've read some, and I don't see much value in them. I honestly don't. And I think the main reason is because it is trying to use probabilistic novels to say, oh, this is what's interesting to people. When it's like, that's not obsession, that's not fascination, that's not curiosity, and it's certainly not skepticism. Instead, with story, we want to follow our obsessions. And that's where we find meaning.
So a good writer has to be obsessed?
I don't know if obsessed is the right word, but I respect it more. Like somebody who's going to care deeply about the details. Somebody who's it's going to be meaningful if it's as meaningful to them as it is to me. And that's what I deeply care about as an audience member, And then I also know with my own creation, if I don't deeply love it or deeply care, then I get bored really quickly. I mean, in general, I get bored quickly. That's why, if I see something and I can predict it, 20 minutes out, I don't care. And that's how a great story is like, I don't know where this is going. If I don't know where it's going, I'm in. I'm fascinated.
Right. And it goes back to, Jon Favreau and Chef. He deeply cared about the ingredients. Yeah. And when he worked with his son in the food truck with John Leguizamo, and his son said something like, it doesn't matter or whatever, and he pulled him out. He said, no, it matters. Yeah. It was a great scene.
Yeah, exactly.
I forget the exact, what happened with it. A sandwich was burnt or something happened. But we care. This is everything.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that's a beautiful example. I love it.
Thank you for watching the video all the way to the end. Here is a complimentary question from our book Story Questions.